What if I told you a 5'3" bodybuilder who sang about Satan and his mother in the same breath got knocked out cold by a guy from a band nobody's ever heard of? And that video went so viral it became one of the most famous punches in rock history. 15 years later, he's still telling people it was a sucker punch. Here's how Glenn Danzig found out that the devil doesn't always have the last laugh. So I've covered the Misfits in depth, but basically Glenn Danzig walked away from the Misfits in '83 after years of fighting with Jerry Only over money, as well as control and who actually owned the band. But when he left, he didn't just leave, he went full on scorched earth. Took the name, the logo, songwriting credits. Jerry Only spent the next 20 years in court trying to get them all back. That's the Misfits story. This is the Glenn Danzig story. Starts the moment he walks out the door. The thing about Glenn at this point, he's too famous to disappear and not famous enough to fill a room on his own name. Misfits had a cult following but never really broke through. Never had a hit. Basically a Halloween party that got out of hand. And Glenn wants to be taken seriously as a musician, not as a dude in the skull makeup singing about brains. So he starts Samhain, dark, heavy, no more horror punk winking. Eerie Vaughn on bass, Steve Zing on drums, Glenn up front singing like a demon at a funeral. 2 albums between '84 and '86, Initium and November Coming Fire. Crowds are small but intense, kind of people who show up in all black and don't blink. And Glenn, he's totally fine with that. That is until Rick Rubin walks into a show. Rick Rubin, the guy who produced Run DMC, the Beastie Boys, is about to become probably the most important producer in rock music, at least for a time. And Rubin sees Glenn on stage and doesn't see a horror punk singer. He's seeing a rock star. Short, jacked, angry rock star with a voice that could go from a whisper to a scream in half a second. And Rubin tells Glenn, I want to produce your next record, but I don't want Samhain. I want something bigger. Start a new band. Call it Danzig. So Glenn does it. And in '88, they released Danzig, the self-titled debut, on Rubin's Deaf American label. And many of us were taken aback by the production. Put on headphones and it's like you're in the room with the band. It's the most acoustically dead, and I say that in a brilliant way. And musically, it's like Black Sabbath and Elvis had a knife fight in a church basement. Twist of Cain, Mother, Soul on Fire. Rubin strips everything to the bones, just drums, bass, guitar, and voice. Lets Glenn's vocals carry it all. And the album actually does well enough that people start paying attention. Danzig 2, Lucifuge comes out in '90, and it's even better. Glenn's writing songs dripping with sex and death, which is basically his entire personality distilled bred into music. John Christ back there just killing it with these thick bluesy riffs. Chuck Biscuits is pounding. In between vocal takes, Glenn is lifting weights, drinking a whole hell of a lot of protein shakes, so he can make sure he looks like the guy who could rip your arms off and then write a poem about it. 5'3" and built like a fire hydrant. And he's got this energy on stage where you generally don't know if he's performing or channeling something. And the metal community's totally taken notice. This isn't punk anymore. The metal band fronted by a guy who reads occult books for fun and has a brick collection. And then Danzig 3, How the Gods Kill, comes out in '92. The masterpiece. Cover art, painted by H.R. Geiger, the guy who designed The Alien. Glenn loves it so much that somebody on his team starts printing the artwork on t-shirts without HR's permission. So HR sues him. And the way he serves the papers is perfect. Sends a process server to a Danzig show. And the guy crowd surfs to the front of the stage, slaps Glenn with the lawsuit mid-concert. Prince of Darkness, getting served legal papers by a guy body surfing through his own fans. Dirty Black Summer gets MTV play. How the Gods Kill is 6 minutes of slow-building menace. Sounds like the credits rolling on a whole civilization. But Glenn is now a legit rock star. Got the magazines, theaters, arenas. Got the voice, the look, and the songs, and then Mother happens again. Because Mother was on the first album in '88, nobody even cared. Didn't chart. No radio play, just another track. But then in 1993, Beavis and my brother and voice, Butthead, play the Mother video on their show. Beavis loses his mind over it. And suddenly every teen in America wants to hear the song. Label re-releases it with a live version. Goes number 43 on the Billboard Hot 100. Song from 5 years ago becomes Danzig's biggest hit because 2 cartoon characters said, it was cool. And Glenn, who takes himself more seriously than anybody, owes his mainstream breakthrough to a cartoon where the characters set things on fire. And the other one says, And it goes to prove that the universe has a sense of humor sometimes, even when Glenn Danzig does not. But that's also when it all starts falling apart. Industrial, electronic. Half the fan base walks overnight. See, Glenn's hearing what 9 Inch Nails is doing in Ministry, and he wants in there. But he was like the king of this whole blues metal. In your face, straight up. And they're hearing these synthesizers and drum machines, and they're like, what is this crap? The Glenn looks at the books for the first time, realizes he's sold a ton of records, and never got a single royalty statement. Not one. So he goes to Ruben. He's like, hey, we need to talk about money. Ruben's response, according to Glenn, is, well, you're going to have to sue me. So Glenn leaves Deaf American, the label that built him, and he's one of the biggest selling acts on the label that won't even pay him. At the same time, the band's imploding. Chuck Biscuits walks off the tour, the Metallica tour of all things, because Glenn is wanting him to sign contracts that he just doesn't want to sign. Glenn says it's a drug contract. Biscuits said it was about royalties that he would never see. Same story, different guy. And then on July 5th, 1995, John Christ and Eerie Vaughn, bassists who had been there since Samhain, the guy Glenn refused to sign with Ruben without, both say, that's it, I'm out, the same day, setting a breakdown in communication, which is a polite way of saying Glenn will not let anybody else write a note or earn a dime. Christ said that Glenn was slowly squeezing everybody out, replacing them in his head before he even told them to their faces. Dave Grohl got offered the drum seat. He's like, yeah, I know that. Tells you everything about the job listing. From that point on, Danzig band becomes a revolving door. Guys come in, play a tour or two, and then they're gone. Because working for Glenn Danzig is apparently a very specific kind of hell. Stories start piling up. Glenn fires people without warning, refuses to do interviews unless he controls the questions, bans photography at the shows, threatens journalists, was reportedly told a reporter that he'd rip his eyes out if the article was negative. The thing is, Glenn is smart. He's well-read. Talks about philosophy and the occult, collects bricks from historically significant buildings. Got a brick from the Berlin Wall, from a medieval cathedral, keeps them in his house, the way other people keep baseball cards. But being smart and being easy to work with are two completely different skills. Glenn only has one of them. And then comes the night that changes everything. July 2004. Tuba City, Arizona. Danzig just finished their set. Glenn's backstage. Danny Mariano, the singer of a band called Northside Kings, walks up to Glenn. And Danny says Glenn was shoving people. Glenn says Danny sucker punched him. Video shows Glenn and Danny are face to face. Glenn gives Danny a little shove to the chest. Danny throws one punch. Glenn goes down like somebody unplugged him. Flat on his back, out cold. 5'3" is solid muscle. Guy sings about Satan and death and darkness. Knocked freaking cold by one punch from a singer who nobody heard of and nobody would probably hear again other than the video. Now this is 2004. The internet is just mature enough for a video to go everywhere. And it does. One of the first truly viral fight videos. People watch it on repeat. Yakety sax edits. GIFs. Glenn has to live with that one forever. Every interview, someone's going to bring it up. Glenn's answer is always the same. It was a sucker punch. Glenn will take that one to his grave. While all this is happening, the legal battle of jury only over the Misfits name is grinding through the courts. Glenn had trademarked the name and the Crimson Ghost logo after he left. Jerry started touring as the Misfits without Glenn in '95, so Glenn sued. Years of litigation. Eventually they settle. Deal basically gives Jerry the right to tour while Glenn keeps certain rights on the older material. Glenn acts like he doesn't care, but every time somebody mentions Jerry's Misfits, Glenn gets that look on his face like he just bit into something rotten. And then in 2016, something nobody thought was possible. Glenn, Jerry, Doyle, Wolfgang von Frankenstein play a Misfits show together. The original Misfits reunion, Riot Fest in Denver and Chicago. Sells out instantly. Tens of thousands of fans all see the three guys who spent 30 years in court and play songs about horror movies. Glenn shows up, can barely hit the notes, his voice is shot. 61 years old, trying to sing songs he wrote when he was 22. And it shows. But the fans, they don't give a crap. They're there for the Crimson Ghost on stage one more time. Glenn takes the money, does more reunion shows for the next few years. Every single one gets the same reviews. The energy's great. Nostalgia's real. Glenn can't quite sing like he used to. Tens of thousands of people who showed up are like, I don't care. And through all this, Glenn keeps putting out Danzig albums, each one selling less than the last. Directs a movie in 2019, Verotika, based on his own comic book line. By all reports of those who got to witness the car crash, it didn't turn out so well. Not bad in a fun way, bad in a way where the audience at the premiere was openly laughing during scenes that were supposed to be scary. Glenn, who has never laughed at himself once in his entire life, has to sit there while people laugh at his art. Then 1 year later, he releases Danzig Sings Elvis, an album of Elvis covers. Thank you very much. I mean, Glenn's voice is reminiscent of Elvis, no doubt. He believes he was really kind of the second coming of him in a different form. Some of it actually works. His voice was built for that. But the internet doesn't care about the music. They care about the guy who sings about Satan and made an Elvis tribute record. So they will not let him live it down. And then there's the cat litter photos. 2010, somebody takes pictures of Glenn outside his house carrying a bag of Fresh Step. Internet loses its mind because the guy who sings Mother and Twist of Cain has a brick collection, reads books about the devil, standing there in shorts carrying cat litter like every other suburban dude. It's the whole Glenn Danzig mystique. It depends on you not seeing him in normal circumstance. Second you see Prince of Darkness buying cat litter, the spell breaks. And of course it pisses Glenn off. Not quite like the knockout video, but still gets under his skin. Now Glenn's 70 years old. Is done making albums. People just steal music now and it's not worth recording anyway. The original Misfits played Coachella in April 2025. We're talking about a festival full of influencers and 20-year-olds and bucket hats. Glenn's up there growling through a 20-song set like it's 1982. Told an interviewer that bands he'd do quote-unquote final tours and they'd come back are running a scam. Then he booked another Misfit show. Glenn's sitting in his house in LA surrounded by rare books, historically significant bricks, cats, still the same guy he was in 83, still convinced he's the most important person in any room, still furious that the world doesn't agree, still telling people the punch was a sucker punch. Like, subscribe. Thank you.